if I could have your attention.
Yes, sir.
I'm Brooke. Thank you, Don. I appreciate that undivided attention. I'm Brooke Muller. I teach here. Many of you know I have the great pleasure of introducing our guest this evening, Gunnar Hubbard. And now we're going to date ourselves. I think it was the summer of '85, maybe '86, when I first met Gunnar, and we spent a portion of our summer working with Norman Saunders in Weston, Massachusetts. And Norman is this guru of passive heating and cooling design. He actually had figured out a system in the '80s to heat a house in Massachusetts, could keep it at 70 degrees without use of electricity other than a couple of fans, which was a pretty remarkable accomplishment at that time. So we became friends at that time, and then I saw him at a party in Waitsfield, Vermont 3 summers later, summer of '89, and we were talking, and one of us initiated the conversation by saying, I finally got my act together and I'm going to architecture school in the fall, and the other said, me too. And the other said, well, where are you going? And the other said, University of Oregon. And the other said, me too. So we ended up commuting, convoying out here in August of 1989. We ended up buying a house here for $32,000 and renovating it. We'd have demo parties, and we'd have people over, and we'd give them tools to destroy our house so we could put it back together. But from the very beginning, I would say Gunnar combined a real concern for design quality with an interest in environmental issues and also advocacy and sort of civic engagement and outreach. And he was the director while a student here at the Solar Energy Information Center, which some of you may know became the Ecological Design Center. And since he graduated, he's worked with some very interesting groups, including the Union of Concerned Scientists. He directed the STomorrow Design Build School in Warren, Vermont. He was in practice in San Francisco, had his own practice for several years, worked with the Rocky Mountain Institute. He's a member of the lead faculty to the United States Green Building Council, and now he's the principal of a group called 4 Solutions, and they do consulting work for high-performance green building projects all around the world, and with very well-known architects such as Con Pedersen Fox, Helmut Jahn, Daniel Liebeskind, and Banish and Partners. So I think that Gunnar is an example of what represents what is so great about this school, I think, and this sort of commitment, this triangle, this commitment to design, environmental issues, and advocacy continues to this day. And I might add another attribute, which is an infectious enthusiasm, which makes all of our hours always in the studio as practitioners in architecture, as educators. It seems to be worth it when you get to spend some time with Gunnar. So I'd like for us to give a warm introduction, and then we're going to share a slide to date ourselves even further, and we'll get started. So Gunnar Hubbard.
Thank you, Brooke. Let's see if I can figure this out. There we go. We had to start with the dating of ourselves. You'll see Brooke and I, excuse me. Yeah. Brooke, there's me. Jenny, where's Jenny? Thank you for that embarrassment. I have one, of course, coming down the road too, but to see it in the context there was actually great. So, thank you for your time. And I know, Howard's class has got to get back to work, so I'm going to try and get through this as quick as I can, but in a way that I hope is also effective, because that's obviously what I'm here and hoping to share some of my stories, experiences, and trying to find a balance of some of the work that we're doing with these big name architects, but also just some of my work. And it's been a fun little venture to go backwards and do this. The title here, Cool Buildings for a Cool Planet, actually is a tribute to the late Greg Franta, who died in a car accident. Had been at the Rocky Mountain Institute and started the AIA Committee on the Environment, was instrumental in that, and just very, very much a leader. And he has a book that he was working on with this title, so I stole it from him as a tribute. But I just want to take some time doing a little bit of how to get here, so you'll have to go along with me for some of this down memory lane. But certainly what I'm doing now and some of the practice that we have in my company and how we're trying to apply that on a whole range of projects. And then a little bit of where's it all going, some new projects that are out there, some thoughts that I hope could lead to some discussion either further today or later over drinks. So yes, it's a bit on design projects that I've done, so showing some of those, some consulting projects, and I think showing some opportunities. Some of you may know Colin. I emailed him ahead of time, and he said I had to make sure that I also really talked about LEED, because while you know what LEED is, there's some hesitation on how it's being used in practice and is it being effective. So I want to make sure to touch on that. The Starchitects, as he coined it, has been really interesting working at the range of scales of projects, as Brooke mentioned some of them already. And then probably most importantly, and that's where I feel we as a firm, I as an individual, and where I would like to challenge all of you to head, is how to embrace this integrated design into how you take your architectural education and apply it either in your studios or certainly embrace it as you go further into the profession. So I had definitely a back and forth, right? The family home in Vermont, we're going to see a little bit of that. University of Vermont, over to the University of Oregon, back to the Union of Concerned Scientists in Boston, up to STomorrow, up in Warren, Vermont, over to the Rocky Mountain Institute just outside of Aspen, then out to San Francisco to have an architecture firm with a friend and a graduate of this program, Ned White, and then zoomed back finally after meeting my wife. We decided to move back east to be close to the family, and ended up in Portland, Maine, or in Falmouth. We're actually living just outside of there. So that's the map of what we're going to see in this first part here. So where it all began, we all have someone we need to blame it on. I blame it on my parents. They took me at the age of 12 to the hills of Vermont, and we moved up into the basement of this house-to-be, and it took us 5 years to get this roof on. We peeled every log ourselves. We call it child labor, I believe. And you have one summer was peeling the logs, then you had to let it dry for a year to let it shrink. And even with that, we had to design the house so the house would settle about 8 inches, inch per log onto it. But semi-passive solar house, gravity-fed water, composting toilet. We didn't have electricity for 18 years until finally my dad's health went down, and so we ended up figuring out a way to get power up to it finally. But it was quite an experience. But what it did was make me very aware, and my parents were not hippies, that this is a simpler way of life was pretty instrumental into forming who I was. That mixed in with a little bit from my heritage. My mother came from Sweden, and we spent about every 3 years going to Sweden. There's an old farmhouse that our family inherited, and just sort of the simple vernacular of that, I think, sort of set a base for me that I think is the roots and sort of some of my inspiration of why I wanted to do what I wanted to do in terms of architecture and embrace the environment. But quickly I was sort of establishing this passion for the green thing and what does that mean. And so this is just some quick slides exploring what does that mean from images of architecture, symbols, materials, resources. I just got a kick out of this, a beer bottle in China for some recent travels where it actually says formaldehyde free in the beer they're drinking. Okay, traveling enough throughout the world really, but Europe, just looking at the durability, the longevity of some of the details and the passion that was put into those buildings, and how I really wasn't seeing it in the buildings here in the U.S. Thinking about daylight and how that's embraced in buildings, and that was something I noticed wherever I was going, the buildings I liked. Our resources, what does that mean? And garbage, where does it go? And waste. And these are just fun images to get things going here. Thinking about how we manage our rooftops and thinking about buildings and density, thinking about water, stormwater, vegetation, how does that get woven into the fabric of buildings? Water, where does it go? And the little label there, don't drink it. So you can't just flush it away. You can actually reuse it, but not typically toilets. And it was the base that this all a lot of, I think my passion early on was understanding about buildings, and you know these statistics, the impact that buildings have, and the impact on climate change through all the effort in terms of where buildings are placed and how they're operated have such an effect. And there's so many poor buildings that the majority of our buildings here, quantity of buildings that are just barely meeting code, and there's so much opportunity out there, was prevalent. And as I went on professionally, then it was, you know, the reality. We spend 90% of our time indoors, and is it this, the forming then, sort of where I wanted to go, was this understanding, a lot of it built out of the University of Oregon, and understanding, you know, this is traditional building, but if we want to go further and really change, it's to this high performance side, it's really embracing this concept of sustainability and what exactly is that and what does it mean. And I still am learning what this means, and still am on a path to figure it out. Something that I did learn and am still learning is this whole idea of when do you put that effort in to arrive at high performance building, and this whole idea that we get lost too much in simple concepts and we're not working hard enough to arrive at a high performance building. And what it actually means is that to affect long-term performance and create these great buildings, you have to put a lot of effort in on the front side. I'm still learning what that means and what that is all, how that affects the work that I'm doing and the design teams that I'm trying to engage and clients that we're trying to lead. So the University of Vermont was where this sort of started, and I actually ended up self-designing a major in solar architecture and thought that was where everything was going to go. And that was, it was helpful, but it made me realize I did want to be an architect, but maybe I should first get some experience out in the field. And we'll see some pictures of these guys coming along, but two instrumental guys that formed where I was headed was David Sellers and John Connell, who was the founder of the STomorrow Design Build School. And if you haven't sought out David Sellers or heard that name, it's kind of a fun little research project to find it out. But for a couple of years, I worked for them doing design build projects and you know, again, testing what does this mean to be an architect, and on to the University of Oregon, and realizing, as Brooke said, that this, of all the schools that were out there, when Brooke and I were both at that stage trying to find out how could we embrace the environment and pursue a great architecture degree, that Oregon was the place. And so yes, here's that little house that we fondly called Jabba the Hutt. And Brooke, we're lots of celebration. He said this is after we had the sledgehammers knocking things down, the studio experience, and absolutely enjoyed it. And it was Oregon fostered a lot of support. Brooke, I think you said it really nicely here about how you could engage in very good design and dialogue, but the fact that there was a lot of support, and Don Corner at the time was the department chair, and he really gave a lot to the students and freedom. When there was enough momentum behind it, he went with it. There was, of course, this guy up in the upper back here who was rarely convinced. You know, you always, if you experience that, I'm not convinced, but one of the things here at Oregon, again, was like this whole, you know, the STomorrow Design Build School, having worked there for these architects who were designers and builders. I came into architecture school saying, how can I be sitting here, Don, you know, looking at slides of construction? We really need to engage in that. And so we went on that path. Oh, sorry, I added this one in. This is yesterday at Jabba the Hutt. I went by to take a picture of you know, we go back to the other one. So we planted some little bushes. Now they're 14 feet tall around the house there, engulfing the thing. It's pretty great. But the design build program was one that Don was supportive, and all the faculty were. I think, Don, what did you say today? About 110 students were involved in some way or another. But that's John Connell and Steve Bodanes of Jersey Devil, and David Sellers came in. There's Don right there helping us. But we ended up doing this crazy class and a 3-week intensive of charrettes and design build, just working away, pouring the cement, getting all messy. And it really, though, engaged, I think, a lot of folks in a way that was enough that the program went on for how many years? 15 more years? Still going in its own way. But so it was great. Little ventures off. It was hard to pick here, down the memory lane here. So excuse me for tossing in just one fun one. A bunch of architecture students went up to Seattle. Steve Bedaines had won a competition to design the Fremont Troll under the bridge, and a bunch of us went up there. I got to put the concrete in the nose, but it's, I guess, continued on as a great little, especially at Halloween, an effort. That's an actual size there of a Volkswagen Bug. If you haven't seen it, it's a fun little side tour. So just quickly on Union of Concerned Scientists, that was I left Oregon saying I don't want to just go work in an architecture office. I need to figure out a little bit more about the bigger impact that buildings have on the built environment, and ended up at the Union of Concerned Scientists, and I ran a Renewables Are Ready campaign, basically an education campaign, and we ended up, a whole group of us, helping to write a book about what opportunities are out there. That lasted a short stint because I had a call from John Connell saying, the board has fired me and we need an executive director. As organizations go, they need sometimes a little fresh perspective, and it was time for John Connell to step away from the driver's seat and hire someone. But of course, they didn't have enough money to do a real search, so they were looking for young suckers to come in and work really hard and not get paid very much. And it was an amazing opportunity for me at the age of 28 to come in and be the director of the school. And what I set out on a path to do very quickly was embrace sustainability and weave that into the curriculum. And for those that haven't explored STomorrow itself, it's a great design build program where they really do embrace design and are teaching sound practices of construction. They've got weekend classes, week-long, and they have a whole sustainability curriculum that's going on. I saw a poster actually in the hall across from the architecture office isn't there. And so if you're looking at something to do in the summer, this is a pretty interesting place to look at. I got an opportunity to be involved in the green of the White House, and this was my first foray into the bigger picture, what's really going on in terms of professionals who are really trying to make a difference in the built environment. This is the first time I met Greg Franta was at this, and there were about 100 professionals who came in, and where Clinton had said, I want you to do in my house, I want you to do in your house I'm going to do in my house what I want you to do in your house. And it was an interesting effort, existing building, looking at the old executive office building, but just the effort to explain what's the potential. But it spawned a bunch of different things. Later on, I kept sort of on the path of working at a larger scale, and this is years later, but a guy that went to the Senate actually, and we did a roundtable for the U.S. Senate on sustainability and green buildings, and sort of this whole connection was, I felt, set me up in a way that when the Rocky Mountain Institute knocked on my door, seeing that I was getting burnt out at STomorrow, I was asked to come be part of their green development services, and a lot of it was building on connections that had been made from actually the green of the White House, and brought them in and started weaving folks from the green of the White House into courses at STomorrow, and that built a relationship with RMI, and I got hired there. A whole bunch of different things were done while at the RMI, but a pretty interesting one was this performance-based fee contracting, this idea that you could design a building, even at 4 Times Square in New York City, with an incentive package that if the building performs better than code, the design team actually might get paid more for that success. So it was pretty risky. There was I got a lot of funny looks along the way, but 4 Times Square was one that stepped forward, and then just up in Oregon, North Clackamas High School was another great success of just integrating in sound sustainability practices, but there literally was incentives put forward to the design team to go further and succeed, and they would actually get paid more by this, and it's a good local example to go look at. So there was a myriad of experiences there. Singapore, we went to for a week with a bunch of folks running charrettes. But what RMI was doing, I felt, was they were a change agent, they still are, in terms of getting people excited, right, about what's the potential of green buildings and really giving the right statistics, doing the research. But they weren't seeing projects all the way through. They were not seeing them all the way through. And I just didn't like that. I felt I needed to, if I was going to have a better, bigger, and broader effect on the built environment, I needed to go a little bit further. And so I figured if I'm going to do that, I probably should become a licensed architect. And so headed to San Francisco, and that's where Ned and I teamed up. And we weren't quite sure where we were going to go with all this. But I sort of put the green building consulting stuff a bit on the side and said, okay, I want to apply some of this experiences that I had at the Rocky Mountain Institute to buildings and see if can I really do it. And it turns out it was harder than I thought to apply some of these principles. This was an interesting one. This was the first one, was a straw bale project in Bend, Oregon. It was Adobe was the style that the client wanted, and but they wanted thick walls, but we couldn't find enough of Adobe material in the high desert of Bend, Oregon. So we ended up going down this path of straw bale, and we were really nervous about it. And we had to get them to sign off on it because of straw bale, you really want a roof over it. And they wanted this Adobe look, the client. So we had them sign a letter saying we're not liable when this leaks. It did leak. They've put a roof on this thing years later. But the other kind of, I think the interesting thing on this was that feng shui was something the clients were excited. We designed the whole house to be passive solar, size the glass appropriately. Shading devices, they didn't put those on. Those got VE'd out at some point. Some of those realities came into effect. But the whole house also got shifted because of the feng shui expert in Austria. The client said, here's our birthdays, and here's the site, and we want to make sure we get our bed facing the right direction. And they suggested shifting the house 30 degrees away off of solar for the feng shui. I just was baffled. So actually, I should have a picture. There are solar panels up on the roof that are pointed south, diagonal to the front face of the building. And some things you just have to walk away from. That was an early experience. Style was one of those things, too, that I quickly realized I did not have a style, and I'm okay with that. Because then a client came to me and said, we want to do an interior kitchen remodel. And they picked these cabinets. And I just went with it. You're walking around with a client, and you're looking at different finishes, trying to develop, what's their aesthetic. And I was like, wow, okay. Here we can go. But there were a whole bunch of projects with Ned. They're smaller scale, residential, but colors. The whole idea of engaging sketching. Ginger taught that to me early on, and how critical that ended up being, and quickly being able to communicate. And with the design build background, being able to do a quick sketch for a builder to apply to a design is absolutely critical. A family friend ended up calling for a large project on the East Coast that I wasn't sure I could handle due to the scale, or did I want to from a sustainability environmental perspective. And this was Lake Winnipesaukee in Wolfboro, New Hampshire. And they had been going down a path with another architect, and the architect just wasn't listening, and asked if I could just come as a favor just to look at it. And I started sketching over the other architect's plans, and the husband, who was kind of really into the macho thing, and the wife, Sheila, she really wanted a little more sex appeal to the house. And so we ended up with something like this, but at 8,000 square foot house, I just was going, what am I doing here? But they wanted it. It was an interesting opportunity. And we went forward, we built it. There was an existing house here. You can see some of the curves from another building. And here's one side of the building. I'm going to go through these quickly in the interest of time. But a pretty crazy roof that Howard's over there shaking his head. Oh my goodness. But the details, I think, are what were fun. The craftspeople that got involved in this, the client was willing to spend the money to look at ways, of hiding the garage, dumping it into the hill, trying to work with sketches, trying to arrive at the stonemasons were really, really excellent. Trying to find those lines, connecting them together from a detail perspective, trying to bring the rocks up, and how do you swoop that out appropriately, and then, oh yeah, the windows, how do you do the detail of that? That was a good exercise, Don. And the owner, Dave, was playing with blacksmithing, so he got involved in the project. They were embracing lots of craftspeople to participate in, so they, had little birds done. The little sculpture, I designed the deck so all the water would go off this corner of the deck, and they got a sculptor involved, and arrived at this bear holding some fish. And you can see down the bottom here some of the fish that got dropped below. So it was just, they were playful, they had fun. You can see where it connects in and out of the mouth, and the Fine Home Building put on their back cover. The house is too big to go as a prominent feature in Fine Home Building. Didn't meet their criteria, but it was just a fun little piece. But the details, I had a lot of fun with working through all these. And then going inside, how to get in this case, it won a lot of fireplace, and to bring the stonework into the house, big open rooms, nice kitchen layout, a little earlier sketch in the upper right, and then what we ended up with, working with the stonemasons on site. That's that curve you saw on the outside, on the inside. And again, bringing some of that detail into the building itself. The upstairs, the vaulted ceiling, just a gathering little library. They went all out with the tile work and everything, worked with an interior designer and trying to balance all that. The downstairs fireplace, I had some fun with. These are actually stone risers in there. And some of the detail of the ironwork coming in for the railing. Sketch concept and how that got detailed out. Got to have a wine cellar, of course. And you need also the home theater. Downstairs bedrooms. But so that was a really amazing project in many ways, but I got them to do foamed insulation, so we made the walls really high performance. The boiler, we were able to work with the HVAC contractor to get the boiler size right. Worked with as much as I could on reclaimed wood wherever we could. But there's so many battles that I couldn't win, but there were ones that I could, and I felt the building overall was a great opportunity. But when you try to weave in the sustainability, it's going, that's too big. I don't want to keep doing that. It was a great house, and I love going back to visit it. But the question was now, do I keep going with architecture, or do I fold back into the sustainability and green consulting? And my wife and I met and decided to move east to raise our family, and it was a balance. So I continued doing some architecture, and again, just quickly going through these. Here's the before and the after in addition. And I was just showing these first. This is where I was starting to get Fort Solutions going, but was filling in the little holes with some architecture along the way. A nice lake house just down the road from the big Meredith resident. And then that same family bought a property next door. And this is where I learned that I don't really like hip roofs with pitch roofs. I should have learned that, but I didn't. But it still came out quite nice. The before in the lower right and the after. Another lake house. And you have to hire the photographer to take some photos to make you look good. But just a nice feel, again, working with materials, natural materials, open sensibility, and just another just couple of houses quickly. down on Cape Cod for some family friends. Little Compton, Rhode Island. Sorry, not the Cape. Little Compton, Rhode Island. This was a concept sketch, but that got simplified down from a budget standpoint. And I was just down there actually a week ago taking some photos of it. And this came up, I think, nice from a simplicity and organization. They had basically, so brother and sister were married with kids. So 2 master bedrooms on the 1 master bedroom, 2 master bedrooms where the kids met in the middle. So from a diagram standpoint, this is the back side. It's, simple scale, vaulted ceilings, using the space effectively. Again, good heating system, good insulation, good windows, proper orientation. Oh yeah, I did keep this one in. And then this is one just north of me in Freeport that I designed, but we won't go into the details. All right, so there was the architecture side, design side. Now we're shifting into the consulting side. And so I realized architecture, I can do that. I like it. In fact, I may go back to doing it someday once everybody's doing green buildings in the whole world. So I got my work cut out for me. But I realized I could have a bigger impact on the built environment working as a consultant to architects, owners, and developers. So architecture is great, and I do houses every now and then, but I felt I wasn't doing enough. So this company based in Portland, Maine, we're energy analysts. I'm trying to bring in some good energy nuts, building scientists, and we're engaged in all different projects around the world, and Brooke started that off, and we're going to touch on a bunch of those. Lead consulting is what we're finding we're doing a lot of our work in, but just facilitating some initial workshops, changing the direction. We've been starting to do some master planning work that I'm going to get into. A lot going into green building guidelines, actually, trying to direct whole projects. And then from an energy analysis standpoint, we've got a guy doing some daylight modeling and energy modeling and how we weave that into solutions and try and get those contracts. But we're going to touch on some of these projects here in a second, so I'll keep moving. What the company is based on now is helping in this effort. And it's basically the fact that slide from earlier, right? So much of our building stock is just barely meeting code. And you guys know this, right? That's what Oregon's all about, is trying to push the envelope, go further. But it's amazing out there in the world how many people strive to just meet code. The worst legal thing an architect can do before getting thrown into jail is meet code, right? So we want to go further, and as we create examples, we're trying to shift the marketplace and set examples. And that's where I'm giving credit to the U.S. Green Building Council. That's where LEED has been very effective, and the U.S. Green Building Council, and we'll touch a bit on that. But this whole idea of a conventional practice of everyone's in their silos, okay, is what we need to shift. The conventional practice is not about, it's just getting the work done and not working together in sort of an integrated fashion where spending more money on the windows makes sense, right? Because by doing that and getting a better envelope and better insulation, you can downsize your heating and cooling systems, and that pays for the extra investment into the windows and the HVAC system. But that can't happen unless you get the design team together and do the analysis and do the math. And that's something I know it's really hard in architecture school to put your engineer hat on when there's not a strong engineering department here at the U of O, and how to weave that perspective into what you're doing. So as much as you can, try and think that way. But we're really finding some great success in lining up the team and walking through good design solutions that are trying to drill down to get those energy savings in there. And those initial things that, and Oregon's great at this, right, of siting, orientation, massing, is going to affect the long-term performance of your buildings without really affecting the budget. And this is where so often we start working with an architect and they say, Gunnar, no, we'll get you in soon, don't you worry, we'll take care of it. And those initial sketches about programming that they're working with the client, trying to make sure the square footage can fit on the site, let's say, all of them it's what starts driving a whole design. And that simple move of the orientation, right, is going to affect the long-term performance without adding any dollars to the building. So, and then you can do more, right? You can add more into the building, more controls. Yeah, green roofs cost more, but they slow down the rate of runoff of stormwater. And that could be good for a multitude of reasons, right? And if you're trying for a carbon neutral building, yes, you may have to spend some money in order to arrive at it, but you try and do all these other things first before you start investing into those pieces, right? So the balance then, as a company, as a consultant, it's how to weave in the environment and not let the economics be the driver. Because we're building buildings that are going to be around for a long time and affect the health of the occupants. So how do you bring that all together from an integrated design approach? The contracts are an interesting one, and I'm not sure if this is still part of the curriculum here, contracts. Those are one of the pieces as an architect we don't really want to do. But the typical linear design process is going through schematic design, DD, and by the time you get to CDs, it takes quite a while. And then the reality is you're getting to this bid negotiate, bid negotiate, bid negotiate, and that's actually where the value engineering is occurring. What we try to do from an integrated green building perspective is do that value engineering all the way through by, I just showed a couple of graphs there, by doing the math and getting in and doing the energy model and spending more time in schematic design and basically getting the engineers to sit at the table and get the ducks aligned with the structure, size things appropriately, ask the right questions about envelope. And by the time you get to CDs, everyone knows how to put it together because they've all been at the table. Versus, I'm the great architect, and here you now heat it and cool it and light it, right? And I know that's inherent in this program, but it's amazing. So when you go out in the real world and you're tasked by an architecture firm to start working on a project, ask the question, is the engineer involved? How come they're not at the table? We're here making major decisions about this design. Is the engineer at the table? 95% of the time, they're not there. And that's the shift that's going on in architecture and where you can be a leader in trying to shift that direction. So if you start applying that at different scales, and here's an example from a master planning scale, where you take the larger systems of water, of energy, and in this diagram here, we're trying to decide from a planning perspective, when should people be at the table to participate in decisions. So this concentric circles here are site evaluation, programming, schematic design, design development, and then here are system ecologists. They're in there first, right, working through assessing a site. What's the soil types, right? Where's the water going? What's the ecology of place? And then you start bringing in the architecture after you've done the analysis. So civil engineers hate it when I show this slide because they're way out on the edge. A lot of times for any development, civil engineers come in and they start laying out, this is how thou shalt build in this development from a planning perspective. And so much has been lost at that point from the opportunity for long-term environmental performance. So planning, mapping out, what is designing the design process? When should people be involved? And that affects the contracts, going back to that, right? How are you going to set up a contract to get these folks at the table when you're trying to design and build a building, and you as an architect, have a fixed fee of 8% or 10% or 15%, and you have to have in that the whole team. And here, what are we saying? We need to add more people to it. That gets complicated. You can imagine from a client's perspective, well, that's not how I did it at the last school we did. Why are you saying that we should include these people? And who's going to pay for them? Well, a lot of the payment does not have to go out the door because it turns out that there's a lot of overlap in the profession as we start applying it in projects. So we've been encouraging this effort, and I wish I had more clients to say the success on it, but of getting the clients to agree to initial charrette before contracts are signed. So basically trying to get everybody that's part of a team and the owner into a room 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, maybe more, trying to design the whole project in a charrette format, engaging with each other, trying to figure out, do we have everybody we need at the table? And based on that experience, everyone then goes away going, now I know what the client's interested in, capable in. You know, as a consultant, I might know that, wow, that engineer's not really thinking outside the box. And we need to think about getting someone else at the table to push it, because they're already, they did a school that's 40,000 square feet, and they already are sizing the HVAC system, and we haven't even worked out the orientation of the building. So something's wrong here. And if you're successful that way, then contracts are put forward where everyone sort of knows what their role is, and you have more opportunity for success from an environmental perspective. And then just another example is we've been working on a project, University of Massachusetts Sherman Center. It's a large lab facility that's underway, and they've been pushing for LEED, and we're the lead consultant, but we're also doing the energy modeling. And we started laying out some tasks for the site, and based on their schematic design, and they had a major timeline. And you know, this seems simple, okay, but the reality is it's not done. So we're trying to take some of these tasks that we're responsible for, and who needs to be at the table. So the engineer, we're there, the architect's there. And are we looking, so this was looking at water and site issues. Then here's looking at energy, envelope, and daylighting, and how we're looking at an atrium study there. Based on the results of that, we can then start really fine-tuning the facade further. And based on then getting all the massing right, we can then look into ways to capture water, et cetera. And so we planned out meetings of the team to get together. And this was all done after initial one. So it's just a sample of some of the ways that you can design the design process. The integrated approach then is where you get these great results, right? All these aspects come into play when you put them on the table right from the beginning. And it's the success, I think, of communication and talking is where you get those benefits. So LEED then ends up being something that, you know, it's a tool. It's all it is. LEED is not the goal. A lot of firms out there and clients are saying, do LEED, and that's all. And thankfully, we're getting hired sometimes because of that, and it's okay. But what we try and do from a LEED perspective is use it literally as a way to follow along good design practice. It's not the driver. Too many times, and that's where if you look, Google LEED, a lot of folks are pointing their fingers at it, saying it doesn't think enough, it doesn't, and there are a lot of people are misusing the tool. It's been very effective. And what it does is it establishes the criteria. It gives a structure for thinking about environmental issues, thinking about how green is your building. And you know, we know more about the cookie box off the shelf, right? Using that analogy, than we know about the buildings we walk into. And that's what LEED's trying to do. And there's other green building rating systems around the world. China has now 3-star. Abu Dhabi has one called STomorrow. In Australia that have Green Mark, Green Star. The UK has BREEAM. And so if you haven't looked at some of these, there's really some good things going on in terms of change and trying to help learn from one and improve upon it so that we create better buildings. And we know what's going in and what's coming out, ideally, what's the statistics. And I think LEED's good compared to others, and is because it is a consensus-based process. It wasn't just a group of smart people in a corner saying this is what should go in a green building. It actually was a broader network of those involved in the built environment and are still involved. And I think that's where it's I think effective, and it is affecting shift in the marketplace and globally. Italy's embracing LEED. Sweden's actually up now. It's in Canada. It's a global phenomenon, really, in a good way. It's not in a perfect way. I said it's in a good way, that's being asked for, and it's giving a real structure and excitement. I've been teaching lead classes in China. I've been teaching them over in Dubai. I've taught them in London. And it creates a structure that people are asking for. And I think the best thing is that it just helps set some goals early on for lack of anything else. And so if you're not using it to assess a project you might be working on in studio, it might be something just to pull out and have on the sideline just to look at, just to help with your thinking if you're not already doing that. But it's set up in a way there's design credits and there's construction credits. But what I think is the greatest thing is that it really is pushing towards front-loading the design process, getting the team around the table right from the beginning. And that, I think, is continuing to be sort of the hammer's beating on the drum about this because of the success stories that are out there about good green buildings. So some of these examples then, an East End school, I talked about this earlier, I think in Don's class, where we wanted to save a school, but we couldn't. Just from a diagram here, it's the Starship Enterprise concept down here in a triangular shape, but getting the orientation right of the classrooms to the sun. This I put in for Ginger's benefit. See, I did learn something. I can do a box, and we can do light meters. And that does inform design, because what we found out is that we really did in this existing building, trying to incorporate daylight, that we needed a skylight monitor in the back because having it just on the south side wasn't enough. And then it was a matter of how do you design that. And the architect had a little fun with the light shelf itself, bouncing light in. The Starchitects started early on with Snøhetta. Was brought in to help look from a green building perspective for a project, competition they won in Margate, England, that ended up not going forward, but just this idea of an art gallery, that's it, like a shark fin out in the water. But just a fun project. Perkins and Will brought us in for a lead project in Arizona State University, which had an orientation issue. It really did. And so they end up integrating in some shading devices to help with that eastern, in this case, morning sun that would bake a project like this. But the way the site was configured, it had to end up like this. And the design team did a good job in trying to do the proper assessment to help with exterior shading within the architecture of the building. In New York City, the KPF brought us in for the Jet Stadium when they were going after the bid for the Olympics, and this was already far along by the time they got involved. But there's a lot of beer that gets drank at games, it turns out, and when you start looking at waterless urinals, the amount of potable water you can save by the number of people that go to a game. So we started doing some analysis to help conserve water, looking at ways. This actually had vertical axis turbines in it. That seemed pretty neat as a concept. It did not meet the budget at all. In fact, the consultant goofed and misread the windrows, and they did not produce like they were supposed to. And the added steel structure, they got booted down the road, and this is where the design was headed. The KPF did a whole redesign to a glass box, and that had its own inherent problems. So we realized that these KPF big architects have neat ideas, but how they weave in solutions into the architecture and how to make sure it performs, meets the budget, this was going to be a major problem from the western setting sun on the Hudson. The design of this project was spanning over the railroad tracks at Penn Station. So pretty interesting site. But what that did was gave a confidence to KPF, and it was actually Chris Stoddard, another graduate of the U of O program, that brought me into the shortlist for City Center. And so this is the project that I've been working on for 4 years in Las Vegas between the Bellagio and the Monte Carlo. This is a Mandarin Oriental hotel designed by KPF. These towers are residential towers called the Revert Towers by Helmut Jahn. This messy shard thing is retail space by Studio Daniel Liebeskind, And this is a tower by Norman Foster, Foster and Partners. And so these front four are ones that we're the lead consultant on. And this back one is Caesar Pelli, the signature hotel. And in the back is Raphael Vignoli for another residential tower. So it's 18 million square feet, $9.4 billion development, must get LEED silver, high LEED silver, or thou shalt die. It is still quite a project. These back two, Green Building Services did this one. Stephen Winter Associates actually was a consultant on this back one. Those both just got gold, and I just found out on Friday that we got gold on Studio Daniel Liebeskind on the front side here, and the Mandarin should be gold shortly, and Veer. And this one is a story that I'll get into in a second. But it was an amazing experience working with all the interior designers and trying to green the interior designers, trying to work with these architects. So it was a lot, unfortunately, of miles on the plane to Las Vegas and back from Maine, which is not a green thing. But it was, do I play with the devil or don't I, was what I had to deal with. Similar to the Meredith resident, it was 8,000 square feet. Do I help out these family friends and actually have some fun doing some neat design work with some great craftspeople? In this case, they're going to build this building anyway. Could I help make it better? And yes, I stayed involved, but there was an amazing amount of design work that was part of this and the coordination efforts. And just to pull out a couple of nuggets, this whole roof for Liebeskind was a big old shiny roof that from a heat island effect we wanted to do something about. So we brought in, we had, excuse me, the idea of the green roof, but you don't want a green roof in the desert. We really shouldn't be building this building anyway. Actually, in fact, Vegas shouldn't even exist because it's a desert and there's no water. In this case, though, let's try and help and not hinder. And so there's some really interesting ideas that were put forward about how to still work with the architecture, this spine that was shattering up through the roof that's letting in daylight into the central core, but how might we work with what's the proper species for that and handle it and maintain it. And that did not make it, let's just say. But water was one. We ended up, in the end, 33% savings over code through choices in fixtures within the hotels. It's a lot of showers people take, a lot of faucets, a lot of sinks, and we were able to work in a collaborative way with the designers to arrive at low-flow fixtures that met their aesthetic, and we're able to achieve some major savings across the board. But crazy amount of materials and steel, and this is, for many reasons, not a green building, and we can debate that all night, but the fact is, it went forward, and the biggest thing I think from this was the corporate shift for City Center, for MGM Mirage saying we're gonna make a green building. What does this mean to us? They took it on, and they are using it to help foster change in all their projects that they have globally. So it's really interesting from that perspective. This, just a very quick story, is this Harmon Hotel ended up got put on hold because there was a major structural problem right here where these beams needed to have the rebar go out to a horizontal bond beam and wrap around the rebar that was going horizontally. They didn't do it, the structural contractor, and they found it too late after the building was actually, the facade was going on, you see on the far side there, and put the whole project on hold. And in fact, they had to knock off the whole residential tower on top and not build it because of the structural implications. So that project sort of is just shelled and dormant. Talk about some lawsuits. Not my problem, though, I'm glad to say. But just quickly through these in the interest of time. Howard's class has got to get back to work. The Revert Towers, this is a glass building that they wanted, and you can't have a glass building in the desert and still try and get to 14% better than ASHRAE code, which is a requirement for a LEED building. So here are these horizontal light shells, actually, shading devices, excuse me, that wrap around this whole building, which many, many times tried to be VE'd out because they cost too much, and they were able to keep it because they couldn't build the building and meet the standards that the client had put forward without them. So the Foster Foster, actually, the blue tinting, that was not their original concept. They had so many other great ideas to meet it, but they did not have the budget to meet it. So it was an interesting thing of hiring the star architects, setting budgets that were not real, and saying, now go do it green, and not communicating what are those implications for it. So a lot of lessons learned here. I think it's still a success in many ways, but not necessarily the one you want to tout as the greenest building you've ever seen at all. But it was just, they're my kids, bringing them, this is what Daddy does. We work on big buildings every now and then. There's inside, there's a couple of shots of the Liebeskind project, just amazing spaces, but with a neat feature, we were able to maintain, as in the lower portion, radiant cooling in the primary pedestrian area to help temper where the people are, right? Buildings don't need heating and cooling, people do. So you put it where it needs to be, and that was a great energy saving for a building this scale. So just one of many, and there you can see it under construction, and it's opening December 16th is the grand opening for it. And it's kind of exciting that it's done. And so LEED Gold is what we achieved when silver was what we were tasked to do. Quickly through some others, College of New Rochelle, I thought just architecturally it was pretty nice success from the designer standpoint. Hannaford grocery store of all things, LEED Platinum, first in the world. We got that certification this summer. I'm going to jump through because of time from this side, but here's just an example of the analysis that we do on projects when we get brought in. It was not it's a auditorium building, and we had a lot of pushback initially from the HVAC contractor and engineer, and we helped go through a whole effort of looking at utility savings based on different high-performance upgrades from lighting controls, heat recovery, a bunch of different things. But the biggest move was right here, where we introduced, or the idea, and the engineer was pushing back, and for the longest time, and finally they went with it, but the simple idea of putting the air where the people are. So we delivered the air into the seats for an auditorium and returned it up high, and that was one of the measures that we went through, and while it cost more, we were able to pencil it out and show the energy savings and convince the owner to go in that direction through doing the math during the design phase. And so this is during construction, pulling together. So that was kind of fun. LEED for Homes is something we do in the state of Maine. We're the LEED for Homes provider. And just a couple of just fun examples. I know time is of the essence here. There's Norman. I've never met the guy, although I've been working with Foster and Partners for quite a bit. This is what their studio looks like, and that's only a small portion of it in London. But this, an opportunity to just see all these different offices and how they engage in projects, how they work their employees, the dialogues that you have. It's been a really interesting path to go on. And I think the one that, of these architects we've been working with that have an international reputation that I've enjoyed the most is Banish and Brooke worked for them, and they bring us in. They do green buildings. This is the Harvard project I'm going to go into some detail on. It was the Harvard Alston Science Complex across the river. They're building a whole new campus, and Banish came up with the idea of creating a quad, as a true Harvard way, through 4 buildings versus one big massive one. And they designed platinum level buildings. In this case, the client only wanted gold, so this was the first time we were hiding LEED credits from the client. No, we're not sure we're going to get that one. We better not. So we were worried it was going to get concepts or going to get VE'd out. But Banish brings us in because they don't want to handle the paperwork and sort of herd the cats in that regard, and we're happy to do that for architects like Banish. But the different buildings, again, I know I'm moving quick through these, but I'll blame it on Colin and his roommates who said more pictures is better than less. So we're on the more pictures side here. But here are the 1 building, 2, 3, and 4 buildings. And you can see some of the organic shapes that Banish is great at incorporating in. So you have the face that meets the public and the street edge. And start noticing what's going on with the facade here. And that's what I want to point out, that they're really good at changing the facade to address proper orientation in terms of climate or engaging in the architecture, the streetscape. And this is an interior courtyard, and they do a lot with what are called winter gardens, tempered zones that sort of help with transitional spaces that also are used when the climate's right for tempering and just hot air rising, just exhausted up and out, and don't have to have any fans and pumps and motors, and still, in this case, engage in a very dynamic building. A model of that in the Stuttgart office. And here's the engineers for it are TransSolar. If you want to go explore what some innovative engineers are doing out there on projects, I urge you to look at TransSolar. So in this case, they came up with this idea of bringing in an earth duct into the base building to use the earth's consistent temperature to temper the air into the atrium spaces. And then same concept in some of the winter gardens, allowing the air to exhaust at the top, and a myriad of other ideas. But I think the whole idea of the window is a good little exercise. What are the 5 things that a window does? View, thermal performance, solar heat gain, you have to control that, proportions, aesthetics from the inside, the outside, and control. Does it have a level of operability? Did I miss any? I think I got them all. That's where I thought. But here's how Banish takes it from a design perspective even further. So here's this whole facade package that was going out, looking at different concepts that they were using to explore windows in terms of wind resistance for this exterior shading, light shells, level of transparency, how many panes were they working with, glare protection, is that on the inside, level of operability, triple glazing, double, basically tuning, glazing, and controls based on the orientation. So that went to this, different levels of facade types, and this is just one page of this package, and here's the diagram of those 4 buildings and showing where those different facade types were, and when you put it all together for type 1, type 2, this is how they overlaid based on the different orientations of the building itself. And then trying to help from a diagram, from a pricing standpoint, to the facade companies who are bidding on how to actually make this, then this is how it diagrammed out architecturally. And again, just one side. And then in section, how you might have an upper, here's in section, both of these, 2 different types, right? A level of controllability of sunshades, operability, what a exterior sun shade, solar shade might look like, and how that all attaches. It was really, really well done. Models to help communicate the idea, and then a whole mock-up. In this case, the mock-up, because it was a lab building, you don't want to have operable windows in a lab building because of you're trying to keep clean environments for doing your testing. So, but we still wanted, when the temperature was right, and this is the East Coast, the fall and spring, when you could actually open up the building and let it breathe and not have to worry about tempering it, they came up with this concept of doing it through the skin of the building, through a filtration system. Wow, that was fun. Did I have anything to do with that? No, but we were there. Well, I was there. I saw it. I took the picture. No, but the fact is that, there's so many projects like that auditorium where someone's not there jumping up and down. Banish is already doing it. What I was working with is like how much glass, when they started, VE started happening at certain stages from the client, and we were trying to use the lead criteria to help guide some decisions that were on the table. But really interesting. There's a couple other pieces from it. How to reduce the amount of concrete. The engineers put in voids, basically using these air-filled recycled plastic voids within the grid of the rebar. And here you can see a mock-up of the radiant, which was going to radiant cooling into the ceiling. That was part of the tempering. So this was a way, and I should have the statistics, I'm sorry, but of how much concrete they're able to not put in the building based on this concept. So concrete is from an environmental perspective, has a huge impact on climate change. So they were doing the right work there, working collaboratively with the team to arrive at that. Some of the stormwater pieces I thought were also great, trying to look at how to capture everything from the roof and take it through a bioswale into storage tanks, and then we were capturing condensate from the buildings as well, and putting that into, piping it back up into the building for flushing all the toilets in the whole building. And able to do the math with them, and that's what we were actively involved in, but trying to find out what would go away versus what was something we could capture on the site and contain. So just some time. We're going to fly through these just for fun. We had the opportunity to jump over to Dubai. All that work's gone away, so this is just fun pictures of imaginary projects, it turns out. But Dubai was one of those places that, again, like Las Vegas, really shouldn't be building buildings like this, but they were doing it. So I had to go over and check it out. And in the same day, you can actually, in Dubai, it turns out, ride a camel and go skiing. This was actually a design concept for the ski area, which obviously could not have a glass roof. But they actually did build this thing. It was amazing. So this chairlift goes up and dog legs up, and it was insane. I had to go, of course. Tallest building, the scale that they were working on. But we got brought in by Foster & Partners on a building similar to the Hertz Tower in New York City that they built, some similar sort of structural concept. Doing the proper analysis, working with a consulting engineer for that project, because of the economy, is not going forward. But it was a challenge underway because of the extent of glass in the desert, and we were already underway with some high challenges. We were brought in to actually do the energy modeling on this one, the World Trade Center, designed by Atkins, but their photovoltaics woven into this whole facade. And that's part of the whole pricing on that one. And that supposedly is actually going forward on that one. We worked developing some guidelines for Jumeirah City, and it's a little faint, I apologize for that, but a huge part of Dubai that by creating these guidelines, you'd end up with LEED gold buildings for any project that went into this development. That was what the client asked for. And then a similar from a retail perspective for some of the work going on in a maritime city, also in Dubai. Both those projects are on hold, wondering if they'll ever come back. Murphy Yawn brought us in for a project in Amman, Jordan, and they were off on some residential towers on a pretty interesting site. They were not going to get the light pollution credit for this one. I was pretty sure of that right from the beginning. But Murphy Yawn was doing quite a bit from thinking about orientation, views potential, cross ventilation, daylight harvesting, and we were working away on that we were through design development, and that one went on hold as well. Lovely economy that we have. In Bahrain, we didn't work on this one, but it was a cool building with windmills incorporated into it. I've heard that these are not spinning because the building's not fully occupied, and that when these start spinning, they're generating more electricity than the building's currently using, and the utility's not set up to take electricity back. So they're just sitting there and looking pretty right now until the building's occupied and they can use the load. Again, just quickly, this is a Bahrain developer brought us in to look at a new sustainable city for 250,000 people. They were looking at a site in northern Africa and Tunisia, and we were brought in and helped facilitate a guiding charrette internally to help figure out what would the city be. And we convinced them that we have to help them write the RFQ, RFP, and we facilitated that process and shortlisted a bunch of firms, and it got down to 4 firms that we were going to go and interview with the client to evaluate, see who would win the bid to create this master plan for a new city. That's also died as well. But it was an interesting, I think, exercise. And there's some good examples out there, and this is one of those scribbled down in your notes if you're doing any planning, but this One Planet Living criteria that's out there. It's a really, I think, one of the better ones that is thoughtful about all the different aspects that should go in from a master planning perspective. This was a result by Arup in the RFQ process, taking what we had come up with as guidelines, offset emissions, reduce and eliminate waste, and they put it into a diagram, and this was really helpful. This was EDA's diagram of how we basically had the RFP written about how you do your process. Explain your process. Don't show us, how you're going to design a city for us. We want to know how you're going to pull the team together and facilitate it. So it was just some interesting efforts about, planning, looking at a city scale, cultural, historical, and anyway, just some fun ways to think about how you plan, how you're going to approach different projects. This one I'm just going to fly right by. It's Masdar headquarters, designed by Adrian Smith, that we're helping a contractor in Dubai bid on building this project. That whole roof is covered with photovoltaics. Adrian Smith had been with SOM. He designed the Burj Dubai. That's the tallest building in the world currently, and he's left to do his own firm. But I thought it was a pretty interesting effort. Who knows if it'll actually get built, but the idea of trying to use these central cones as a ways to get hot air rising and trying to get some tempered air, shaded tempered air. I'm going to blow by through China. Well, we'll just skip that. The tourism that goes there, that was great seeing that building. If you've been in China, you should go to China. This is neat. The wall is amazing. It's not a building. That's a cool building, I would think. But I just want to make a part of my closing that I'm leading up to, I promise, Howard, that when you start looking at, and as we are aware, and U of O is great about this, the scale, what's going on, the global impact that our built environment's having on climate change, and Amory Lovins calls it global weirding, I think is an appropriate way to talk about it. But the effort in China based on the population, this is showing density in India and in China, the urbanization that's going on in China is pretty insane. The amount of times that I've been over there and what I've been starting to venture into, and we have several proposals in the work in Shanghai and in Hong Kong. You need to pay attention to what's going on there architecturally. It's where you're going to be doing a lot of projects, most likely, because there's statistics that are coming out about 50% of all construction is going on in China by the year 2030 or something like that, global construction based on it. There's like this crazy numbers, and I apologize, I should have that better. But Europe urbanized in 100 years, the US in 40 years, 80 years, and they're doing in China in 30 years with amazing more amounts of people. So the resources that are there, so pay attention, participate, and help where you can. So what's next for me? I just had a call confirming the board approved for a little local project. Yay, in Maine, it's going net zero. This is great. And they're hiring us to help the client, who's the board, set up the criteria, essentially like we did for Gulf Holding, where we set up the RFQ criteria. We're going to do that for them, and then put a list together of architects and help interview. Hartford wants to keep going with green buildings. Crazy stuff in Asia is coming forward. I don't know where it's all going to go. I mentioned to Brooke, I had one project that I thought was similar from a design problem to what the studio's working on, but at a larger scale. This was a competition that was just, they actually just lost it, but Next Phase Studios is a Boston firm that we do work with, and one of the principals there had been at Banish, and so we work a lot with them. And this was a concept for a mixed-use community over in Beijing, and from an idea of really weaving in sustainability into the design of this, and you can, these are the boards from the project itself, but trying to incorporate, there's a river edge here, and then pedestrian path, vehicular, and how they were weaving the design, looking at the climate data, transportation data, occupancy, and through an iterative process arrived at a pretty dynamic shape of a building, embracing sustainability from using some of those tempered, well, it was a winter garden concept, but along the perimeters, trying to look, in this case, they were pushing the idea of the solar, doing directed solar onto a central solar thermal collector for the whole community. They are weaving in a lot from the allocating spaces accordingly based on orientation, function, and use, and then bringing in a playful side of the water. You'll notice this design from the forest. They sent an image over to their modeler from the forestry building that Brooke worked on as an idea for some of their atrium spaces, and came together with this really, I think, interesting, responsive, but it's the weave of the ecology and the marshlands and where the water's going and how to bring habitat into the development and try and keep the massing at appropriate level, so letting sort of pedestrian access, but trying not to have a further impact onto the ecology of the area through doing development that is appropriate for the region and respectful to the climate and the uses that were being put forward. So this was a competition. They were up against Zaha Hadid, Foster and Partners, UN Studios, and about 3 other firms. And they lost to UN Studios. But I think for an example of where firms are going, where they should be going, this was the most sustainable solution for that competition. The owner ended up going with UN Studios because of having a bigger name. Next Phase is not as known, but I just love, if you start in your precedent studies, as you start looking around for who's doing what, seek out those architecture firms that are really trying to push this side, okay? So to me then, and I swear I'm coming to the end, Howard, I am. I know you're getting antsy over there. We're getting there. What this all means, I hope, is that, you know, you're, and I think you're at the U of O for a reason, that when you leave here, that your hat is a hat not just saying, I'm just the designer, that you're our clerk of the works, and that you're doing more than just designing. I mean, that's obviously what we're trying to learn, but too often we get caught into one task, and we get stuck in a rut, right? Doing your job may not be enough. We have to actually push a little bit further. And yes, and this one, actually I meant to not show this slide, but buildings have an impact, and you as architects can be a leader, and you should be, in terms of what's going on with our built environment, and because it is having an effect on what Amory says, global weirding, and it's going to cause some very angry snowmen if it actually keeps going along the way. So I hope I've shared just some, obviously, a little bit of my past, to get you to get a little perspective of what a graduate might do once they leave here. So take a little time, sit back and think about what you're doing. Look for beauty in nature. Fire, although we can make it, we need to look at that one up in the sky to guide us, not light it. Bring ecology in. I was happy to see the studio Brooks running and a bunch of classes. Keep that up about respecting nature and the different biosystems and the needs that they have. Think about infrastructure, about passive as the first way to go, rather than burning fossil fuels. The resources are limited. This was from a diagram I was sent forward, but the actual amount of water we have on the Earth and the amount of air on the Earth, that it's not that much when you put it in that perspective. So some concepts to end with, and I wish I'd actually spent a little bit more time on this, but sustainability, while I say I'm a sustainability consultant, a green building consultant, the biggest sort of hammer that's been hit on me recently is that it's not enough. Because if basically sustainability, I was told, is just a slower way to die. It's like, well, what do you mean? What are you talking about? I thought I was doing the right thing. But you know, if you're in a car trying to get to Mexico and you're driving towards Canada, slowing down isn't going to get you there, right? So it's like we have to shift, and it shouldn't be scary. This isn't about doomsday. It means that we need to keep working and really trying to weave that in. So sustainability then is a good to keep us at a certain level, but we need to start looking a little further into creating buildings that generate more than they use and clean the water, clean the air, and to sort of restorative, regenerative developments. And that's sort of a path that you need to go on. And this integrated design, if it's not talked about enough, jump up and down, have it be your design build phenomenon at Oregon and get more engineers in to critique you in your designs maybe, because the decisions that are made, at the table early on that include the engineers and that level of analysis it's an iterative process that as you go through a design process, it's not linear, and you need to work on that. And as faculty, I teach this, figure out ways to do it. Bring in habitat early, water, energy, materials, budget, and to arrive at the design. All that is critical. And once you leave here, it's not happening in your offices. There's a lot of fuddy-duddy architects out there that are not embracing this, and it's up to those that are coming out of schools to work and push some of these ideas and weave it into the fabric of the architecture that's out there. And finally, it's a balance, it's a process. I am challenged every day in trying to figure out how to do this. I want to help create better buildings, help do that, but I'm constantly learning every project. And I love that aspect about the work that I'm doing. Not in the budget happens so often, and it's a constant challenge to try and look for those opportunities to use budget and use the economics as a driver, because that's a language so many people that can understand, but they're out there. But for me, this little feature of my computer's about to run out of power. That's really good. In fact, maybe it did. Wait a second. We have 3 seconds. My kids, right? They're Santa. That was practicing to be Santa. My wife getting out, spend the time, enjoy a little bit, celebrate your culture. And then this was my greatest success for my son. Think of someone you know or a book character who deserves a medal. My dad. He's making green buildings. It's good for the planet. And these see the solar panels there? See, so that's my greatest success so far. So thanks very much for your time. Howard, do you need to take them away? Go ahead. Okay. That was probably a lot, maybe. More is better. Any questions? Yes?
I'm wondering, what percentage of the work that you do is like retrofitting or starting from a project from like the initial design phase? And I guess what percentage, and then how those approaches are maybe different?
Yeah. The retrofit work is coming on strong, and we've been working with a local group actually to bring in contractor, engineer, mechanical, MEP, design build contractor, basically. Can do design and implementation, a facade group, a finance group, to arrive at a way to approach clients on a full systems approach for an existing building. And we're finding more and more clients who are asking to do it. They're not building new buildings, they want to fix an existing building. So most of my work has been new construction, but there's more and more coming in the door, questions being asked, and we're trying to figure out how to meet that market. The lead for existing buildings is actually fairly good and really directed towards the facilities folks and how do you operate buildings and run them. It's actually pretty good to sort of lay out a structure. And we're currently have a contract in for the IFC Towers in Hong Kong, designed by Cesar Pelli. That's the tallest building in Hong Kong that wants to get a green building rating on it. So we're starting to see more and more sort of actually challenge. Class A office space is coming onto the market that's green, and some of these older buildings that don't have that designation are saying, "Ooh, we better do something about it." And I don't care what rating system it is, but the fact that they're trying to fix and improve and create better buildings and reduce their energy consumption is really neat. Yeah.
You had a graphic up there earlier about where people, different groups ought to be at the table.
Yes.
Is that found at this site?
Is that, sorry?
Would I find that graphic at this site? I thought it was helpful.
You like that graphic, is that what you're saying?
Yes, and would it be up there? I mean, if I went to this site, would I be able to pull it?
Oh, to my site. I apologize. No, but you can email me and I can send that to you for sure. Okay? Be happy to do that. Yes?
Hey, Gunnar, when you get these charrettes together, are people willing to, do they get paid? Are you getting professionals to come in on their own time, like a competitive thing? Or do they get paid in a contract to do that?
We set it up that's paid on a daily rate, and they get paid for their time. There have been a couple of instances that they bring more people at a lower rate because sometimes that front it's hard sometimes to convince the client to take that first step, the leap of faith, if they haven't done it before. Sometimes that's challenging to get them to put that nugget up front because they're used to, schematic design that's, what's that, 10%. And if we come in on a project and front load so much, they're going to fear that they're going to use up all that fee. And it's a effort in trying to shift, that fee structure and rewriting the contract so that that's okay. Get the people at the table, get everyone there. Yeah.
And are these people they've decided to hire? So these are the professionals?
Most of the time. There was one project with Hartford. We did a charrette, and they brought in two. We had a design architect, and they had two architects of record that they'd worked with that they wanted to sort of bring up to speed. And they brought both those firms to the charrette, not telling them which one was going to get the job, because they wanted to sort of see how they interacted and worked with this team that we had brought in. So, yeah, I taught an integrated design class at Greenbuild. The Greenbuild is the annual U.S. Green Building Council conference, and we went through an exercise basically talking about integrated design and broke out into groups and trying to arrive at what's the ideal way to approach a project in your office. And each time we did these day-long classes, it arrived at the same thing. Like we end up having to be held to a fee when we don't know enough about the site, about the client, how they work, and when it's all about then butting heads and fee and streamlining, and not about let's get everyone around and really figure this out. So we try to do that, where we convince the owner to have a day rate, and after that charrette and the report and the result, everyone sort of buys in and says, yeah, that's what we want to do. Now let's go forward and write a contract.
The way you charge is that little piece up front, and then everybody gets on board.
Yeah.
Great. That's
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah, and I'd like to be doing it more than I am. Yeah.
In the same line, you talked about performance-based fee structure. Have you actually done that in your practice, or if that's worked out?
We're right now with this. I mentioned the existing building response. We're trying to get a whole group together and form. We're calling it the 2030 Collaborative, trying to get that concept together, and we're using that as one of the models we're exploring. Essentially, why is an owner going to take a risk on this team? And our risk is that we want to go in, basically do a walkthrough of a building and look for that low-hanging fruit, single pane windows, bad lighting, controls, a boiler that's going, it's not glamour work, right? But we want to be able to do the analysis and not tell them how we arrived at it, but say we can basically do a return on investment of X number of years, and you're going to get healthy air, comfortable employees, students, whatever, right? A level of controllability we're going to put in, and we're pondering then this idea that, you pay us over 5 years, X amount based on how many savings. We're projecting this, and we get half the savings over I don't know, you have to figure out what the delta is over what would have been done or the old building, and then use that as incentive. And if we do better, everybody wins. And so we're pondering that as a model for it.
So you're not using that on new build construction?
I've been doing new buildings, but it's something to bring back around because there's enough experience. What was funny in that North Clackamas one that we were doing, the design team actually pushed back, the owner pushed back and said, wait, I'm already seeing, from early workshops in Surratt, seeing that it was a different process. They were like already saying, we'll pay more now. You guys are doing more work, and this is great. We know we're going to get the results. We have the confidence. Everybody's doing what one should do, right? And we were like, no, we're supposed to incentivize the design team later. Stop offering to pay now. It's supposed to be about the utilities later. Cut it out. That's kind of funny. Yeah.
I just have a comment on the Clackamas High School. I actually went to that high school.
Oh, yeah.
Like, that's the school I went to. And I think it was the first incoming freshman class when it was actually done. But the only issue is that the lights kind of flicker on and off.
Okay.
Because the sensors are so sensitive to that exterior climate that the lights will start flickering when you're taking a test sometimes.
So, okay.
So that might be like an issue to think about in the future.
What that sounds like is actually they did some cost-cutting exercise on the ballasts. So they probably went to the 10% dimmable rather than the 1% dimmable. So that may be just actually a technology fix. They could swap those out and fix that. But it.
Because I went there and it's popped up probably 3 times since I've been here.
Yeah.
About once a year. So use it.
Yeah.
My question was, in your performance feedback
Yeah.
and analysis and all that, do you ever count as one of the benefits the environmental attitudes of the occupants? And how that, growing up or going to a green high school like that would foster greener behaviors and people actually taking the time to open the windows or put on, close the shades and I was wondering if you do measure that or
We're
going to or
we want to, we do, we strive for this. That's where the company's going, but it's not done enough. Like so often, the punch list is done, you're out of there, and you have no idea if the occupants are happy with the building after you've left it. And that's even a criticism of LEED, because after the fact, buildings aren't performing at the level that they were supposed to have, and there's not the data going back from an energy side. But are people happy? Did they learn like they were supposed to? Did they interact with that little screen in the lobby? There are a lot of examples that are out there, absolutely, where they are seeing those results. Like some interesting ones, people are spending more time in a building. Like all of a sudden the utility data comes in and this building's using more electricity than we thought. And what's going on? There must be somebody goofed, right? And there's several stories here where they actually go back in, and it's because people are staying longer. They're actually having meetings in the building where they used to go out, and it's because the building, they love it so much, they're using it more. So, and that's similar. Some schools that are out there, I think, I don't know if there's enough data on what happens to the students. They go to the University of Oregon after they're going to school at Clackamas. I don't know. Yeah, Kat.
Yeah, about 30 years ago, there was a movement for attached sun spaces, solariums, greenhouses attached to houses. And then I know some people give you a vote so that we can get too much moisture or transpiration of moisture from plants and mold growing in houses. So they weren't doing that. And I just wondered if there's any movement toward that new technology like dehumidifiers. And if you Google LED grow lights, there's like 1 million hits now for LED grow lights, and I wonder if you know anything about LED grow lights too.
I don't know about LED grow lights, and I know you can absolutely do tempered spaces, greenhouses, when designed right, but that also goes along with understanding how much moisture, and it goes along with maintenance and how that's woven into a building, depending on the building type, its scale, looking at the climate that you're in. Is it operable by a person, as in to let the heat or cool thin or out, or is it mechanical? All those things affect whether that neat idea 30 years ago is applicable, but it certainly is. It certainly is. But I think we know a lot more now and how to manage that. Yeah.
One last question.
the structure. I'm the big cheese. I have an operations guy who helps sort of run the day-to-day stuff and and he helps write the contracts and proposals. And when I'm traveling around the world, there's someone there that can help when the phone rings for certain things. So I've sort of brought them up to a certain point. And I've got one guy who's a building scientist, so to speak. He's trained as an architect, but he went to Arizona State University, and so he does all my modeling. And he also does lead projects as well, so he sort of weaves the two together, but does daylight and energy analysis, essentially, and basically works with all the other project managers. So there's 8 of us total. It just went down to 7, and may have to go to 6 unless I sign some contracts. But it's basically project managers and senior project managers. And at some point, the idea was to have an admin person someday, maybe, to help, because everyone's got to share in answering the phone. But it's a pretty open office in that way. We have a staff meeting once a week that's about trying to check in with people. How are they doing? And I have a really great group that I feel confident I can send them off. There's several projects that I don't know the client, and they're running the projects all on their own, and it's really great to have that, because that's, I think, a successful business, because if they're all doing well and the company's growing and I don't have to get on a plane and go, that's a good thing. I could maybe stay. So, I mean, that's the long term, obviously, to grow a vibrant company that's self-sustaining, and maybe I could spend more time with family or do stuff. So, pretty busy though right now. Busy. Great. Thank you. Yeah. Was this thing even on?